There's a specific kind of silence that follows the moment your entire life cracks open. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. Like the world forgot to keep spinning for a second. I was standing in our kitchen. The kitchen I had painted myself. The kitchen with the coffee maker I'd bought him for Christmas. The kitchen that smelled like his cologne because he'd just walked out 20 minutes before. And I was holding my phone so tightly my knuckles had gone completely white. On the screen in front of me was a text thread, not to me, about me. And in that silence, in that still, airless moment, something inside me didn't break. It didn't shatter. It didn't crumble. It calcified. My name is Serena. I'm 33 years old. I was 6 weeks away from getting married. I had a joint savings account, a shared lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Edinburgh, and a man I had loved for 4 years sleeping in a hotel room, with the woman he told me was just a colleague. And by the time this story is over, I want you to understand something very clearly. I did not lose. I won. But the way I won? That's going to take a minute to explain. So pour yourself something, get comfortable, because this one is a story. Let me take you back, all the way back to the beginning, because I think that's where people always get it wrong. They skip the beginning and go straight to the explosion, and then they don't understand why the explosion mattered. I met Daniel at a conference in Manchester. I was 29, he was 31. I was there representing the architecture firm I worked for, standing by the most boring display panel in the entire convention hall, wearing shoes that were absolutely destroying my feet. And he walked up and said, and I will never forget this, he said, "That's a terrible panel, but you're clearly carrying it." I laughed. He laughed. We got coffee, that turned into dinner, that turned into a 4-hour walk along the canal. And by the time I got back to my hotel room at midnight, I already knew I was in trouble. He was charming. God, he was charming. Not in that slick, practiced way that makes your gut tighten instinctively, in that warm way, the way that feels earned. He remembered small things. He asked follow-up questions. He looked at you when you were talking like what you were saying was genuinely the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. He was a project manager for a tech company, traveled a bit, ambitious, financially stable without being flashy about it. He was close with his mom, which I used to think was a green flag. I know. We did long distance for 8 months, him in Edinburgh, me still in Leeds, and it was hard in that sweet, aching way that long distance is when you're both actually trying. Letters, actual, physical, handwritten letters, flowers sent to my office, weekend trains that cost more than I should have spent. When his company offered him a hybrid position that meant he could work from anywhere, and he chose to base himself fully in Edinburgh and asked me to consider moving, I cried. The good kind of crying. The kind where your chest hurts because it's too full. I transferred to the Scottish branch of my firm, I packed up my flat in Leeds, and I moved. And for a long time, for a genuinely, honestly long time, it was wonderful. We built something, a real something, a Sunday routine, friends we shared, a favorite restaurant on Leith Walk where the owner knew our order, a rhythm that felt, in the best possible way, completely ordinary. He proposed on a Tuesday, not a special Tuesday, not an anniversary or a birthday or a romantic weekend away, just a Tuesday evening when we were cooking pasta together and the wine was open and some old Norah Jones album was playing, and he turned around with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and he said, quietly, simply, "I can't imagine Tuesday evenings without you." I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. We set the date for 14 months later, a venue outside the city, in the Borders, small, 60 guests, wildflowers and candlelight, and everything I'd never known I wanted until I was planning it. And then, about 8 months before the wedding, something shifted. I couldn't name it at first. It was like when a painting hangs slightly crooked on the wall, and it takes you weeks to figure out what's been quietly bothering you every time you walk past it. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to and say, there, that is the problem. He started traveling more. For work, he said. His company had a new client partnership, a firm in Dublin, another in Lisbon. He was on the road 2, sometimes 3 weeks a month. I understood. I told myself I understood. I told my friends I was fine with it. But he was different when he came back. Not cruel, not cold exactly, just elsewhere. Like he'd left the most important part of himself in whatever city he'd just come from, and the version of him that came home to Edinburgh was a slightly lesser copy. Present, but not really present. Kissing me hello, but not really looking at me when he did it. I brought it up twice. Both times he said I was overthinking. Both times he pulled me close and said he was just tired, just stretched thin, that work was intense right now, but it would ease up soon. And because I loved him, because I wanted to believe him, I let it go. The first time. The second time. And by the third time, I noticed, I'd already started to wonder if I was the problem. That's what they count on, you know, that you'll turn it inward before you turn it outward, that you'll spend so long asking yourself, what am I doing wrong, that you never get around to asking, what is he doing wrong? I almost fell for it completely. Almost. It was a Thursday in October. Gray Edinburgh morning, rain tapping against the flat windows, Daniel supposedly in Lisbon for a client presentation. I was working from home. I'd made coffee, settled into the corner of the sofa with my laptop, and I was perfectly fine. Normal. Just another Thursday. And then his iPad pinged. He'd left it on the kitchen table. We'd always had an open device policy in our relationship. Nothing hidden, everything accessible, because trust was the whole foundation, right? He knew my passcode. I knew his. The message preview was visible from where I was sitting. I didn't mean to read it, but I did. Last night was everything. I keep thinking about your hands. Come back soon. R. And there it was. That silence I told you about at the beginning. I put down my coffee, I picked up the iPad, and I sat there for what felt like a very long time, my heart doing this strange, slow thing in my chest, not racing, just deliberate, like it was deciding whether to keep going. I opened the thread. I'm not going to give you every message. I'm going to spare both of us that. But what I will tell you is that it was not new. It was not a single mistake or moment of weakness or a catastrophic lapse in judgment. The thread went back 7 months. Receipts from hotel dinners in cities he'd told me were work trips, a photograph she'd sent that I will never be able to unsee, inside jokes that only exist after months of intimacy. Messages where he called her things he had never, not once, called me. And one message. This is the one that did it. This is the one that moved me from devastated to something altogether colder. She still doesn't know. She wouldn't even suspect it. She trusts me completely. Poor thing. Poor thing. I put the iPad back exactly where he'd left it. I went to the bathroom. I turned on the shower so the sound would give me privacy, and I sat on the edge of the tub and I breathed, slowly, deliberately, for about 10 minutes. And then I started thinking. I want to be very honest with you here, because I think it matters. My first instinct was not revenge. My first instinct was grief. Pure, bottomless animal grief, the kind that lives in your stomach and your throat and behind your eyes. I loved this man. I had built a life around this man. I had moved cities, reshaped my entire future, said yes to forever with this man.
And he had spent 7 months looking at me across the dinner table, kissing me goodnight, discussing centerpieces for our wedding, while somewhere on the other side of Europe, a woman named R was waiting for him to come back. So yes, I grieved. In that bathroom, with the shower running, I grieved quietly and thoroughly. And then I dried my face, and I put on a completely normal expression, and I walked back out into the flat. And I did not call him. I did not call my mother or my best friend Priya or my sister. I called my solicitor. Here's something people don't always know about me. I am extraordinarily good at compartmentalization. It's not a personality trait I'm always proud of, but in this particular situation, it became my greatest asset. I spent the next 4 days conducting what I can only describe as a quiet investigation of my own life. I looked at our joint finances. We had been saving for a house. We were actually in the process of finalizing a purchase, a 3-bedroom semi-detached on the outskirts of the city that we were supposed to sign the final contracts on in 6 weeks, almost exactly the same week as the wedding. The deposit, £64,000, was sitting in a joint savings account. £64,000. Half of which was entirely, documentably mine. Money I had saved before we'd even met. Money that had simply migrated into a joint account 2 years ago when we decided to pool our house savings together in the spirit of trust, in the spirit of building a future. I spoke to my solicitor on day 1, a woman named Claire, fiercely competent, who had helped me review the flat lease when I'd first moved in. I told her everything, calmly, clearly, with the specifics. She told me what I needed to do and in what order. I took notes. I called my bank on day 2. On day 3, I had a private conversation with the estate agent handling our house purchase, a very understanding woman who, when I explained that circumstances had changed and I needed to pause the process, asked no questions beyond the practical ones. On day 4, I called Priya. I told her everything over 2 hours and 3 glasses of wine in her kitchen, and she sat across from me with this expression on her face, fury and grief and absolute solidarity. And when I finished, she said, very quietly, "What do you need from me?" I said, "I need you to be completely normal around him until I'm ready." She said, "Done." Daniel came home from Lisbon on a Friday evening. He walked through the door with his suitcase, his laptop bag, and the particular brand of cheerfulness that I now understood was the cheerfulness of a man who had spent the week doing exactly what he wanted and felt absolutely no consequences for it. He kissed me hello. I kissed him back. I made dinner. We watched something on television. He fell asleep on the sofa. I sat beside him, and I looked at his face. This face I had loved so completely, this face I had built a future around. And I felt something that I can only describe as a very specific kind of grief, with a very sharp edge on one side of it. I had 3 more weeks of this, 3 more weeks of completely normal, because the timing, I had decided, was everything. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened next. I did not want to destroy Daniel. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. What I wanted, what I had decided sitting on the edge of that bathtub, was simply this. I wanted to make sure that when everything fell apart, I was standing. I wanted to leave nothing behind that he could use. No financial entanglement he could complicate, no leverage, no shared asset he could dispute or delay or turn into a weapon. I wanted to walk out of that relationship with every single thing that was mine, completely intact. That was the goal. Everything else? That was just consequence. Week 1. I quietly transferred my portion of the joint savings, my documented share, everything my solicitor had confirmed was legally, cleanly mine, back to my personal account. This was not theft. This was not vindictive. This was me simply retrieving what was mine before he had any opportunity to complicate access to it. I also notified the estate agent that the purchase was formally being canceled. When Daniel's name came off the buyer's agreement, a consequence was triggered in the contract that I will explain in a moment. Week 2, I found a flat, small, bright, on the top floor of a building in Stockbridge, with a window that looked out over the rooftops toward the castle. I paid 3 months' rent up front. I arranged for Priya's partner, who had a van, to help me move the following weekend. Week 3, I told my sister everything. I told my mother everything. I called Daniel's mother, and this one was hard because I genuinely loved that woman, and I told her gently and without drama that the wedding was not going to happen and that I was sorry and that she deserved to know before anyone else. She was silent for a very long time, and then she said something that I will keep in my heart for the rest of my life. She said, "I've been worried about you for months, and I didn't know how to say it." She cried. I cried. We promised to stay in touch. I believe we will. And then, on a Thursday evening, exactly 4 weeks after I'd found those messages, I sat Daniel down at the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I had cried everything out weeks ago, in private, where it belonged. I put my phone on the table between us. I had taken screenshots of the thread, forwarded them to myself, deleted the evidence of the forward. The screenshots were timestamped, 7 months of evidence. He saw what was on the screen. He went completely white. And then, and I need you to really appreciate this because this was the moment I understood exactly who I was dealing with, he started explaining, not apologizing, explaining, as if the problem was my comprehension and not his choices. He said it was complicated, he said it wasn't what it looked like, he said she had pursued him, that he'd tried to end it multiple times, that I didn't understand the pressure he'd been under. I let him talk. I genuinely let him exhaust himself. And when he finally stopped, I said, very quietly, very evenly, "I already know everything. I'm not here to discuss it. I'm here to tell you that it's over. I've moved my savings. I've canceled the house purchase. I've arranged to move my belongings out this weekend. I've spoken to your mother. The venue has been notified. I'm leaving." The color drained from his face in real time. You canceled the house? Not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "Please don't leave." Not, "I love you." You canceled the house? I almost smiled. "Yes," I said, "I did." Here is what he did not know about the house cancellation. When you are the primary buyer on a property purchase in Scotland and withdraw at a certain stage of the process, the contractual terms of the specific agreement we had signed meant that the seller was entitled to retain a portion of the agreed reservation deposit, a deposit that Daniel had contributed to from his personal account, not the joint one, specifically to demonstrate financial commitment to the purchase at the seller's request. He lost £14,000, not because I arranged for him to lose it, because the contract he had signed, the contract I had reviewed very carefully with my solicitor, contained that clause. I simply exercised my legal right to withdraw at the moment that was most consequential for him and least consequential for me. It was not revenge. It was architecture. I moved out that Saturday. Priya and her partner helped me carry boxes down 4 flights of stairs. Daniel wasn't there. He'd gone to stay with a friend, which I anticipated and was relieved by. The new flat was empty when I arrived, just light and space and that view of the rooftops. I sat on the floor in the middle of the empty living room. I had a cup of tea that Priya had made and a travel mug. It was slightly too strong. The afternoon light was doing something extraordinary with the dust in the air. And I thought about the word he'd used. Poor thing. I need to tell you the rest of it because the story doesn't quite end there. About 2 weeks after I moved out, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I nearly didn't answer it. I did anyway. It was her. Her name was Rachel. She was calling from Dublin. She had said found out about me, not from Daniel, but from a mutual contact who had apparently mentioned the canceled wedding. She had believed she and Daniel were in a serious, committed relationship. She had believed she was the only one. She was not, it turned out, a villain. She was a 30-year-old woman who had been fed the warm, practiced, carefully managed version of Daniel that Annie had received. She had been told he was single, that he'd ended a previous relationship before they met, that he was ready for something real. She sent that message, last night was everything, believing she was in an honest relationship. When she found out the truth, she was devastated. We talked for 2 hours. I'm not going to pretend we became best friends, because that's not quite what happened, but what did happen was something that I think mattered. Two women who had been pitted against each other without their knowledge or consent, who both had been deceived by the same person in service of the same ego, sat on opposite ends of a phone call and chose not to hate each other. We chose instead to simply see each other clearly. She ended things with him the same week Daniel did. Daniel, as of the last update I received through mutual circles, is in the 2-bedroom flat he can't quite afford on his own anymore, with a lease that has 6 months left, 14,000 pounds lighter, having lost both women in the same month. His social circle, which was heavily overlapping with mine, has quietly but unmistakably shifted its center of gravity. He is fine. He will be fine. I don't wish him harm, but I do know this. He will not find it easy to rebuild with the same tools he used on me, because I made sure the relevant people understood exactly what those tools were.
I'm in my Stockbridge flat right now. It's been 7 months since I moved in. The window still gives me that view, rooftops, the castle in the distance, the Edinburgh sky doing its unreliable, beautiful thing. I have a new coffee maker. I chose it myself. It makes unnecessarily good coffee and takes up slightly too much counter space, and I love it completely. I'm not going to tell you I'm fully healed, because that would be tidy in a way that real life isn't. There are still moments, usually quiet ones, usually involving Norah Jones, which I've had to mostly retire from my playlists for now, where the grief surfaces again, where I remember the person I thought he was, and mourn the gap between that and what was actually true. But here's what I want to leave you with. The moment I made the decision not to explode, not to perform my pain, not to beg or confront or collapse, but to think, to protect myself, to move with precision rather than emotion, that was the moment I stopped being poor thing and became something else entirely. I was not a woman scorned. I was a woman prepared. And there is nothing that an unprepared person can do against someone who has quietly, carefully, with absolute clarity, decided to take back everything that belongs to her. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to perform your pain for it to be valid. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is simply not be available to be destroyed. They expect tears. They expect begging. They expect you to make it messy so they can call you unstable. What they do not expect is a woman who says nothing, does everything, and walks out with her head completely, devastatingly level. Be that woman. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever found yourself in a moment where you had to choose between reacting and thinking, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment you realized you were done? Not angry done, done, the quiet kind. And if you've never been there, tell me what you think you would do, because sometimes we learn ourselves in the imagining of it. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real, first person, no filters, no tidy endings that aren't actually true. Every week there's a new story, and every story belongs to someone who came out the other side. I'll see you next time.